In just one day, over 1,000 bombs rained down on Baghdad. A war had begun, live on TV. It was fast, it was deadly, and it changed history forever.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
This is the story of Desert Storm, where 39 countries joined to stop a dictator and launch the most high-tech war the world had ever seen. We'll show you what really happened, from the invasion of Kuwait to the secret airstrikes to the final 100-hour battle that shocked the world. Stay with us, and you'll understand how this war shaped the future, even your world today. War doesn't start with tanks. It starts with silence, long before the first shot is fired. In the late 1980s, Iraq was working over its wounds after a brutal 8-year war with Iran. 1 million lives lost, billions drained, and Saddam Hussein, Iraq's iron-fisted ruler, stood at the edge of ruin. He needed money, fast. Kuwait, Iraq's neighbor to the south, was rich, oil-rich. But to Saddam, Kuwait wasn't just a wealthy neighbor. It was a historical grievance, a forgotten piece of Iraq carved away by colonial powers. He believed it belonged to him. Iraq owed over $80 billion in war debt. Saddam asked Kuwait to forgive the debt. Kuwait refused. Worse, they increased oil production, pushing prices lower and hurting Iraq's already broken economy. In Saddam's eyes, it wasn't a business decision. It was a betrayal. It was war without bullets. The tension wasn't just economic, it was personal. Saddam felt disrespected by the Arab world, isolated by the West, and threatened by a global order he didn't control. He believed the world had ganged up on him, and he wanted to strike back. In private meetings, Saddam's generals laid out maps of Kuwait. Their eyes scanned borders. Their fingers traced supply routes. Military exercises began to shift south. But publicly, Saddam smiled. He reassured the Arab League. He met with diplomats. He lied to the world. Then came the moment that changed everything. Saddam met with April Glaspie, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq. She told him, "We have no opinion on Arab-Arab conflicts." Saddam heard those words as a green light. In his mind, America wouldn't stop him. The road to Kuwait had been cleared, but even Saddam underestimated what would come next. As night fell on August 1st, 1990, Iraqi troops moved closer to the border. Elite Republican Guard units loaded up. Artillery was rolled into position. Thousands of soldiers were already on the move, silent, fast, deadly. The world was asleep. At exactly 2 a.m., the desert exploded. Columns of tanks roared into Kuwait from the north. Attack helicopters flew low and fast, cutting power lines, paralyzing defenses. Kuwait's military, outnumbered, outgunned, was overwhelmed in hours. Government buildings fell. The royal family fled. By morning, Saddam controlled nearly the entire country. But this wasn't just another invasion. Saddam didn't stop at military control. He annexed Kuwait, renamed it Iraq's 19th province. He declared it part of Iraqi territory. Forever, the world watched in shock. Oil prices surged, global markets trembled. The United Nations met in emergency session. And while Saddam tightened his grip, the world prepared to push back. Yet the story wasn't just happening in war rooms. It was playing out in families' living rooms, on television sets across the globe. News anchors showed burning oil fields. Refugees are pouring out of Kuwait. Iraqi troops looting stores, torching banks, and tearing flags from buildings. And the question echoed everywhere. Would the world allow this? Saddam didn't wait for the answer. He deployed 300,000 troops along the Saudi border. He wanted to show strength. But the move did more than scare. It united. In that moment, the United States saw the real danger. If Saudi Arabia fell next, Saddam would control half the world's oil. That could not happen. President George H.W. Bush addressed the nation. His voice was calm, and his words were heavy. This will not stand. This aggression against Kuwait will not stand. Behind those words, the largest military coalition since World War II was being formed. Operation Desert Shield was born. In Saudi Arabia, American troops landed by the tens of thousands. Fighter jets screamed into bases. Navy fleets moved toward the Persian Gulf. One by one, countries joined the alliance: Britain, France, Egypt, Syria, even former Cold War rivals. The coalition swelled to over 30 nations. Saddam watched, defiant. He believed America wouldn't fight. He believed his army, hardened by war with Iran, could stand against the world. He was wrong, because this war wouldn't be fought in muddy trenches. It would be fought in the sky, in the sea, with satellites, stealth bombers, and laser-guided missiles. A new kind of war, high-tech, high-speed, devastating. And as Saddam dug in, preparing for the mother of all battles, the world waited, breath held, triggers ready. The desert was silent again, but only for a moment, because the storm was coming. In the quiet hours before dawn, the sky above the Persian Gulf roared to life. It was January 17th, 1991. The world held its breath as America launched the first strike of Operation Desert Storm, an operation that would forever redefine modern warfare. The first to move were the silent ghosts of the air, U.S. Air Force F-117, Nighthawks, stealth bombers so secret they were known as invisible planes. They flew low and quiet, dodging radar, unseen in the dark sky. Their mission? Cripple Iraq's air defense in a single night. Behind them, Tomahawk cruise missiles surged from battleships and submarines in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. These weren't dumb bombs. They were guided by satellites, capable of weaving through streets and alleys to strike precise targets: communications hubs, command centers, power plants. In Baghdad, night turned into day. The first blasts rocked the city just past 2:30 a.m. Iraqi soldiers scrambled in panic. The air raid sirens screamed, but it was already too late. The coalition had hit over 30 strategic targets in the first hour alone. For the first time in history, stealth technology and GPS-guided weapons were used in a major war. The idea wasn't to level cities. It was to blind and paralyze Iraq's ability to fight back. Over 1,000 fighter jets were flown in the first 24 hours. That's one plane taking off every 90 seconds. The United States, Britain, Saudi Arabia, and a dozen other nations coordinated their attacks with ruthless precision. The goal? Achieve complete air superiority before Saddam Hussein could even blink. Coalition forces took out radar arrays, missile silos, airfields, and power grids. The idea was to strip Iraq of its eyes and ears. The night sky belonged to the West. In just the first week, over 10,000 missions were flown, and it was only the beginning. Over the next 6 weeks, coalition forces would fly a staggering 116,000 sorties. That's more than all Allied sorties in the opening weeks of World War II. The skies rained fire. Bridges, refineries, ammo depots, and even presidential palaces were reduced to rubble. But this wasn't a bombing campaign for destruction's sake. It was a chess game, with every piece removed to isolate Saddam from his military machine. Saddam, however, wasn't going down quietly. Within hours, he retaliated, not at the military, but at civilians. Iraqi forces launched their first Scud missile at Saudi Arabia. These were unpredictable short-range ballistic missiles aimed at spreading terror. 2 days later, Saddam made a dangerous escalation. He fired Scuds at Israel, hoping to provoke them into joining the war, something that would fracture the delicate Arab coalition allied with the U.S. But the U.S. had an answer: the Patriot missile system. Mobile launchers were placed around Saudi cities and near Tel Aviv. These defensive missiles were designed to detect, track, and destroy incoming Scuds mid-air. And they did, most of the time. TV audiences around the world watched in real time as glowing streaks of light arced across the night sky. For many, it was the first war broadcast live, minute by minute. By now, the coalition had grown to include 39 countries. It was the largest international military alliance since World War II. France, Egypt, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Canada, and even Syria contributed troops, jets, ships, or medical aid. This wasn't just America's war, it was a global stand against aggression. This war introduced the world to the power of satellite warfare. Pilots could now see enemy targets before even crossing the border. Precision bombing turned Iraq's sprawling war infrastructure into isolated pockets with no communication, no supplies, no air support. Laser-guided bombs, infrared sensors, real-time GPS tracking. Desert Storm wasn't just a war, it was a demonstration of a new kind of battlefield. In desperation, Saddam turned to environmental terrorism. Iraqi forces sabotaged and set fire to over 700 Kuwaiti oil wells. Thick black smoke filled the skies. Day looked like night. And it wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. The smoke was meant to obscure satellite imagery and throw off bombing runs. But the damage was mostly to nature and civilians. For days, oil spilled into the Persian Gulf. Birds, fish, and coastal life died in waves. The war was now poisoning the earth itself. By the end of week 1, Iraq had lost half its air force, hundreds of planes destroyed, dozens fled to Iran, never to return. Baghdad's infrastructure was falling apart. Electricity, water, and transport lines were in shambles, but the ground invasion had not yet begun. This was still the storm before the storm. When the skies over Iraq turned into battlefields, few imagined the scale of what was to come. For 42 days, coalition forces pounded Iraq from above, day and night, without pause. By the end of the air campaign, over 100,000 sorties had been flown. More than 88,000 tons of bombs were dropped on Iraqi targets. The phrase, shock and awe, wasn't invented yet, but this was its raw prototype. The targets were military, yes, but also bridges, oil refineries, roads, radar stations, communication lines, and even electrical grids. The plan was to cripple Iraq's ability to fight and to govern. Baghdad, once a bustling city of culture and commerce, fell into darkness. Electricity was wiped out in many areas. Hospitals ran on candlelight. Water purification systems failed. People lined up for hours, hoping for clean water, bread, or a glimmer of safety. The goal of the air campaign was to minimize American casualties before the ground invasion. But for the Iraqi people, it was a different reality. The streets echoed with the roar of jets and the thunder of distant explosions. Children cried under their beds. Families huddled in basements, counting the seconds between missile strikes. Saddam's military installations were hit hard. Tanks buried in sand were turned to twisted metal. Aircraft were wiped out on the ground. Command centers were destroyed with pinpoint accuracy using GPS-guided bombs, technology that changed modern warfare forever. But precision has limits. Civilian casualties were unavoidable. The Amaria shelter bombing on February 13, 1991, was the most haunting. A U.S. bomb destroyed what the military believed was a command post. In reality, it was a bomb shelter filled with families. 408 civilians died, most of them women and children. Their bodies were burned beyond recognition. The charred walls of the shelter became a symbol of horror and grief. International news crews filmed the aftermath. Iraq paraded the remains through the streets, calling it a massacre. The coalition called it a tragic mistake. Across Iraq, the civilian death toll is still debated. Some estimates say as many as 3,500 civilians may have died during the air campaign. Others say it was more. What's clear is the destruction. 28 power plants damaged or destroyed, 11 oil refineries hit, roads and bridges bombed beyond repair, telecommunications wiped out, water treatment facilities rendered useless. The United Nations later reported that Iraq had been reduced to a pre-industrial state. But while bombs fell and fire rained from above, Saddam Hussein remained defiant. His propaganda machine kept churning. His elite units dug in. He had lost the skies, but not the ground. And soon the war would shift. The air would go silent. The tanks would start to move. The ground war was coming, and Iraq was about to face a storm unlike anything it had ever seen. The calm of the desert night broke with a low rumble. In a synchronized push, coalition forces crossed into Iraqi-occupied Kuwait and southern Iraq. After 38 relentless days of air bombardment, the ground war had begun. Codenamed Operation Desert Sabre, this was the moment everything had been leading to. It would last only 100 hours, but in those 100 hours, the world would witness a ground assault so swift, so overwhelming, it would redefine how wars could be fought. The coalition deployed nearly 750,000 troops, with over 540,000 of them American. Opposing them was an Iraqi army once thought to be one of the largest in the world, over 650,000 soldiers, bolstered by Republican Guard units, tanks, artillery, and mines covering hundreds of miles. But quantity alone wouldn't stop what was coming. The ground campaign had three primary goals: liberate Kuwait, destroy the Iraqi military's offensive capabilities, force Saddam Hussein into retreat or collapse. To achieve this, the coalition devised one of the most brilliant military flanking maneuvers since World War II. As Iraqi troops braced for an assault from the south, straight through Kuwait, coalition commanders executed a deception. While some forces indeed moved head-on, the real punch came from the west, deep in the desert. U.S. General Norman Schwarzkopf called it a left hook. While Iraqi commanders focused on defending Kuwait City, Schwarzkopf's forces swept hundreds of miles around the flank, out of radar range, into the vast emptiness of the Iraqi desert. Entire armored divisions surged forward, undetected, using satellite-guided systems and night vision tech never before deployed on such a scale. M1A1 Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, and Humvees rolled over the sand like waves. It wasn't just movement, it was momentum, strategy, and speed. In the north, U.S. Marines spearheaded the frontal attack into Kuwait. They hit entrenched Iraqi forces head-on, encountering fierce resistance in heavily mined zones and oil-filled trenches. Iraqi soldiers fought hard, but their positions were compromised, their communications crippled, and their morale shattered from weeks of bombing. Many surrendered without a fight. Others were captured en masse. Coalition forces began finding signs of desperation, food shortages, poor equipment, and soldiers begging for mercy. But some of the most brutal fighting occurred not in Kuwait, but further west, against Saddam's Republican Guard. These elite divisions were better trained, better armed, and fiercely loyal. They didn't run, they resisted. This is where the left hook met its fiercest resistance. Deep inside Iraqi territory, the U.S. 1st Armored Division, 3rd Armored, and 2nd Armored Cavalry clashed with Republican Guard divisions in a series of tank battles that defined modern mechanized warfare. The Battle of 73 Easting, now legendary, saw American tanks destroying dozens of Iraqi vehicles in a single afternoon. Using advanced thermal sights and GPS, U.S. units had the advantage of range, speed, and coordination. Iraqi tanks, mostly outdated Soviet-era T-72s and T-55s, never had a chance. It was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, coalition forces had crushed multiple Iraqi divisions, overrun command centers, and reached objectives that had been scheduled to take a week. By February 26th, the Iraqi military was in full retreat. But what followed would become one of the most haunting images of the war. As Iraqi forces fled Kuwait along Highway 80, coalition aircraft struck relentlessly. Trucks, tanks, jeeps, an entire convoy was incinerated. The road from Kuwait City to Basra became a stretch of charred wreckage, littered with bodies and debris. It was dubbed the Highway of Death. Images of burned-out vehicles, twisted metal, and lifeless soldiers shocked the world. Some praised it as necessary to end the war. Others questioned whether it went too far. Back in Kuwait City, liberation was in full motion. The black smoke of burning oil wells blotted out the sun. Saddam had ordered over 600 oil wells set ablaze in a last act of defiance. Kuwait's skies turned into night. Toxic clouds spread for miles. The fires burned for months, but Kuwait was free. At 8 a.m. on February 28th, President George H.W. Bush announced a ceasefire.
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations.
The war was over. Only 100 hours of ground combat. But in that time, Iraq's military was shattered. Over 3,000 tanks, 1,400 armored vehicles, and 2,200 artillery pieces were destroyed. Tens of thousands of Iraqi soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. Coalition losses? Less than 300 troops killed in action. It was a staggering victory, but the war's legacy was not so simple. Saddam Hussein remained in power. The Republican Guard, though battered, survived. No push was made into Baghdad. The coalition had stuck to its mandate: liberate Kuwait, not topple a regime. For many Iraqis, that choice meant decades more of suffering. And for returning coalition troops, the victory would be followed by mystery illnesses, later known as Gulf War syndrome, along with exposure to oil fires, chemical agents, and unexplained trauma. Desert Storm had shown the world what technology, planning, and precision could achieve, but it also revealed the limits of war, the human cost, the politics, the aftermath. In 100 hours, the coalition had crushed a war machine. But the seeds of future conflict were already sown. And though the shooting had stopped, the storm in the desert had only just begun. While the ground war unfolded in the desert and airstrikes hammered Iraqi positions, another battle raged silently on the waters of the Persian Gulf. The sea was not just a supporting stage, it was a force multiplier. For the coalition, naval dominance wasn't optional, it was essential. The United States Navy, along with coalition partners like the Royal Navy and the French Navy, deployed a powerful armada. At the heart of this floating fortress were U.S. aircraft carriers, USS Saratoga, USS Theodore Roosevelt, and USS Ranger, each acting as a mobile air base. From their decks, waves of strike aircraft launched precision missions deep into Iraqi territory. But perhaps the most symbolic and strategic weapon of this naval theater was the Tomahawk cruise missile. Launched from U.S. destroyers and submarines, these missiles flew hundreds of miles with pinpoint accuracy. They slipped under radar coverage, hugging the terrain, before slamming into command centers, communication hubs, and anti-air defenses in Baghdad. In the dead of night, the sea lit up as the first Tomahawks launched, marking the opening salvo of Operation Desert Storm. It was a technological display the world had never seen before, and it changed the nature of warfare. But the Gulf held danger too. Iraq had sown the northern waters with deadly sea mines, some dating back to the 1900s, others modern and harder to detect. Coalition ships like the USS Tripoli and the USS Princeton struck mines, crippling them but not sinking them. It was a stark reminder that even overwhelming power had its vulnerabilities. To further confuse Iraqi defenses, the Navy executed one of the most brilliant feints of the war, an amphibious deception operation near the Kuwaiti coastline. For days, warships and marine landing crafts staged visible preparations for a beach assault, drawing Saddam's elite units toward the coast. But the real assault came from behind, through the desert. The feint worked. Iraq had repositioned thousands of troops away from the actual attack route, giving coalition forces the advantage when the ground invasion began. At sea, the coalition maintained complete control of the maritime domain. Not a single Iraqi naval vessel made a serious challenge. Their tiny fleet was either sunk, fled, or surrendered. By dominating the sea, the coalition kept vital oil shipping lanes open, blocked Iraqi resupply efforts, and gave their land and air forces the freedom to strike with overwhelming power. In the end, naval power wasn't just support. It was the silent giant that allowed the war to unfold exactly as planned. The dust had barely settled on the battlefield, yet the war scars were already engraved deep into the land and its people. In the wake of the swift and decisive ground campaign, the coalition forces found themselves amidst a landscape of devastation. The liberation of Kuwait had come at a significant cost, not just in military terms, but in the profound impact on human lives and the environment. The Highway of Death, one of the most haunting symbols of this devastation, was the stretch of road between Kuwait City and Basra, infamously known as the Highway of Death. As Iraqi forces retreated from Kuwait, coalition aircraft launched relentless attacks on the convoy. The result was a 60-mile trail of destroyed vehicles and charred bodies. Estimates suggest that between 200 to 1,000 Iraqi soldiers were killed in this assault. The images of this carnage sparked global debate. While some viewed it as a necessary military action to prevent the regrouping of Iraqi forces, others criticized it as a disproportionate use of force against retreating troops. Environmental catastrophe. In a final act of defiance, retreating Iraqi forces set fire to Kuwaiti oil wells. Over 600 wells were ignited, sending plumes of thick black smoke into the sky. The fires burned for months, releasing millions of barrels of oil into the environment and causing one of the worst ecological disasters in history. The soot darkened skies, disrupted weather patterns, and posed severe health risks to both humans and wildlife. Civilian suffering. Beyond the battlefield, the civilian population bore the brunt of the war's consequences. In Iraq, the destruction of infrastructure led to widespread shortages of electricity, clean water, and medical supplies. Hospitals struggled to operate, and the lack of basic necessities led to a humanitarian crisis. The United Nations reported that the damage to Iraq's infrastructure was comparable to the devastation seen in parts of Europe during World War II. Ceasefire and its terms. On March 3, 1991, coalition and Iraqi military leaders met at Safwan airfield to negotiate the terms of the ceasefire. Iraq agreed to recognize Kuwait's sovereignty, disclose information about prisoners of war, and accept the destruction of its weapons of mass destruction. These terms laid the groundwork for future inspections and sanctions. Long-term impact. The Gulf War's legacy is complex. While it showcased the effectiveness of modern military technology and coalition warfare, it also highlighted the devastating consequences of conflict on civilians and the environment. The war set the stage for future tensions in the region, including the 2003 invasion of Iraq. As the world watched the fires burn and the smoke rise, it became clear that the true cost of war extends far beyond the battlefield. The desert went quiet, the bombs stopped falling, and the world exhaled. In just 42 days, a coalition of nations led by the United States had pushed one of the Middle East's largest armies out of Kuwait. Iraq had been humbled, its military shattered, and its infrastructure left in ruins. But the cost was staggering. Over 100,000 Iraqi soldiers were killed or wounded. Tens of thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire, their homes reduced to rubble. Bridges, power plants, communication lines, obliterated. For many Iraqis, the war didn't end with a ceasefire. It was just the beginning of suffering. Kuwait, once a thriving desert jewel, was left scorched. Oil wells set ablaze by retreating Iraqi forces filled the sky with black smoke. It would take months and billions of dollars to undo the environmental catastrophe Saddam left behind. For the coalition forces, only 379 lives were lost, a number far smaller than predicted, but each one a tragedy remembered by families across the globe. Thousands more returned home with invisible scars, PTSD, trauma, and unanswered questions. Operation Desert Storm had achieved its goals. Iraq was out of Kuwait. The message was clear: aggression would not go unanswered. But Saddam Hussein remained in power, and that decision, not to remove him, would haunt U.S. foreign policy for years. The no-fly zones, the sanctions, the inspections, and ultimately, the path to another war, just over a decade later. Still, Desert Storm marked a turning point. It showcased a new kind of warfare, fast, precise, tech-driven, and backed by a global coalition. It was the first real-time war, watched by millions around the world on television. Missiles on the news, night vision raids broadcast live. It redefined how wars would be fought and how the world would watch them. But more than strategy, more than firepower, Desert Storm revealed something deeper: that nations could unite, not for conquest, but for principle. That diplomacy, when backed by strength, could reshape the course of history. That even in the fog of war, there can be clarity of purpose. And that peace, though fragile, is always worth the storm.